Welcome, Jim. Thought we'd spend some time talking about erasing history. With all the monuments coming down and other things, thought it might be appropriate to talk about how this is not something new, and it's not even something that's new within the last 100 years. I thought back to I know the pharaohs, the Egyptian pharaoh that was female, that they went through and defaced all her statues, and that was only one of the times that it happened. But erasing history is sort of a historical trend that's been happening, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's true. The ancients, the ones who had achieved a literate society, or at least a society that could leave a written account of the great achievements of the pharaoh or the king or whomever, they did have a tendency for politics, partisan politics, to intrude. And throughout most of that ancient history with the Egyptians, it was basically a dynastic history, like you mentioned, the female pharaoh, and also I think that was her son who also got rewritten, but he was fine. It just goes to show you the truth will out in the end. I think it was Tutankhamun, the teenage pharaoh. The male, I think it was his mother who was the regent, and she wore, all the apparel, and got into great disputes with priests, many of whom, died because of it. Never offend the priest, but that's something else. It's always been a means to try and establish the power of whoever is currently in charge. And in the last century, yes, it's the communists more than anyone else. Although, when mass media got started in the mid 19th century, because of the steam press changed everything. First came the telegraph, which allowed news to be collected much more effectively and more quickly. But without the steam press, which made basically a very cheap newspaper available, and that led to advertising because, a wide circulation newspaper, people picked up on the advertising angle very quickly. Before that, it was all local, posting bills and whatnot. But now you could reach, literally hundreds of thousands, millions of people soon, simply by purchasing an ad in the newspaper. And of course, the newspapers learned that to succeed, they had to have news that was not necessarily true, but would attract the most eyeballs. And that's something that really hasn't changed for the last 150 years. The eyeballs are now attracted to a black mirror, as they say, instead of a printed page. But it's still the same, drive, the same compulsion to attract as many people as you can by any means necessary. There was a short golden age of the American media in the the second half of the 20th century, where American media prided itself on just reporting the news. Well, that didn't last. It rarely does. Sometimes it comes back. Some people are saying that it's being fought out now on the internet. The internet was touted initially as a way to free the media. I mean, even then people were upset, as it were, that there were only a few TV stations, and that's how most people got their news, as it were. The newspapers learned early on. Most people bought a newspaper to find out how their sports team was doing. For the comics, that's the only reason I pick up a copy of the Daily News once or twice a month. The front page news had to be something totally exhilarating, and that did not mean who signed a treaty and who was about to declare war on who. It usually meant Hollywood stars, celebrities of any sort. Sex scandal is always good, and that hasn't really changed. But rewriting the past has generally been a vain effort, which backfires sometimes in the short term. This was found out to be the case with the demise of the Soviet Union and all of its satellite, communist states. There was a huge outburst of revised news, most of it a lot truer than what had been accepted as gospel, shall we say, during the communist period, from the 1920s until 91. Of course, Russia can't help itself. They're the people who invented, they didn't invent, who basically gave Count Potemkin all the power to create all the fake news necessary to make foreigners believe that Russia was a huge, much mightier power than she actually was. Something else that hasn't changed. China has learned. Now, China also has a long history of trying to not so much change the past, but eradicate it. The main reason, for example, Confucius or Master Kung is so famous in China, as well as in the rest of the world, was because there was, I forget the emperor, but he was famous for destroying so much of written Chinese history, especially the writings of philosophers and advisors and what have you. Master Kung's writings, many of them, were basically hidden in a insulated wall of a building, which basically stood there for a long time. I forget how long it was before somebody decided to do some renovations and found all these hidden, writings of Master Kung, Confucius, and people saying, "My God, this is good stuff," because he was one of those rare people who had, a gift of, looking at the world and saying, "Well, this is what's really going on, and here's a good suggestion for maybe making it a little better." Even the communists, they tried to destroy Confucius when they came to power. And sure enough, about the same time, they realized that communism wasn't working, and they decided to try fascism. In other words, by opening up the economy but keeping it a police state, which is the classic, description of what is technically fascism. Nowadays, anything is fascist if you don't like it. But the truth eventually comes back and reasserts itself. The people who usually want to destroy history have a ulterior motive, which is usually not beneficial for anyone except themselves. It's the classic way for how should I put it, an apprentice dictator to establish power. I mean, the communists were quite open and cynical about it. One of their sayings was, the future is assured, the past is being rewritten. Another way of saying everything is in hand. Don't worry, nothing can go wrong. The idea, the attitude of a true believer in a new creed that will fall apart and cause all manner of problems, which is what communism did. There are still a lot of people who believe in it, which goes to show you not only does history tend to persist, but a lot of the bad ideas that create this urge to basically destroy the past or simply to try and revise it. Is people who want to say, I want to create a perfect state where I run things and everything will be fine, everything will be better. And of course, these people are not students of history. They don't understand it. It doesn't work out that way. They should listen to people like Churchill, who observed, I think it was after he was voted out of office after World War II, that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And he certainly got hoisted on that petard more than once. But throughout all the ups and downs he suffered, he realized that it's the only way that works. It doesn't work perfectly. I mean, he also said of the American democracy, while he was trying to get us, to help him out in the war, he says, Americans always do the right thing, usually after they've tried everything else. Now, he was half American, so to speak. His mother was American, and his father was a syphilitic, debauched English, gentleman, as it were. Back in those days, you could resurrect your family fortunes by marrying a wealthy American heiress who brought money and not much else to the family fortunes. But that's another story. The British have been generally more scrupulous about writing, decent versions of history than anybody else. I don't know if that's been a major asset for them or not, but it's simply one of those, cultural quirks that has served us well. Hasn't always served the British well, because they were quite forthright about the downside of colonialism. But on the other hand, they pointed out all the good things colonialism had done, and now the Indians, for example, they're starting to say, well, they oppressed us, et cetera, et cetera. But without them, we wouldn't have gone through the Industrial Revolution. We wouldn't have railroads. We wouldn't have this. We wouldn't have that. Same thing in Africa, where they only had about a century of European colonialism. Some of it was pretty bad, but a lot of it was pretty, basically brought peace, ended slavery, ended widespread slavery. It's still active in Africa, as we report on our African updates. But the colonial period was one notable for economic progress and peace, and that all fell apart. And it took them about 20, 30 years in Africa before it became fashionable to say, maybe the colonialists had some good ideas. Maybe we should revisit that. And that's still a work in progress. Another problem with history is that in the period before the nation state, and the pharaonic Egypt was definitely a nation state, but most parts of the world were collections of tribes, where they didn't even have a written history. They simply had the oral tradition. And that got constantly revised depending upon who came out on top in the latest squabble for control of the tribe or the coalition or the clan or what have you. But now you have a problem with it being virtually impossible to eliminate the written record, and this is bad for the revisionists, because your revision, depending on how outrageous it was, will be quickly revised, return to a semblance of truth, and it will reflect very badly on you. And of course, we're seeing this right now in the United States with this great war going on about the history of racism and racial violence in the United States. And there are two very different narratives going on. One concentrates on the extremely small percentage of black deaths caused by policemen, many of them black. But that's the whole point of the Black Lives Matter thing, and ignoring the fact that 80-90% of the black violent deaths are black on black, and nobody wants to really address that problem because it is closer to home, more difficult to deal with. It basically unearths unpleasant things. It also, for example, forces you to examine why other cultures don't have this problem. Why, for example, the Asians, be they Indian or East Asian, China, Korean, Japanese, what have you, why they don't have the violence problem. Actually, we know this. I mean, the sad thing about history is that the answers to a lot of the questions that still vex some people have been answered a long time ago. I mean, this idea of studying history systematically arose of all places in Germany and in Britain, but the Germans are the one who pushed it the hardest. The Memorial Project, it's called in English-speaking terms, but basically the Germans, they tend to go. That's a cultural, thing we English-speaking people put on them. But they go at it much more full bore, shall we say, than anybody else does. But they basically went around collecting all manner of ancient data, basically church records, vital statistics, which were only in epidemiology first called vital statistics, was only invented, as it were, in the mid 19th century in Britain, and that suddenly ended cholera in large cities. And that's another story. But anyway, it was basically by looking at the data and coming to conclusions, as it were. The Germans basically collected enormous quantities of data, published books, and they basically saved a lot of that data because they weren't planning on, trying to waging two world wars and trying to conquer the world and destroying a lot of the original data in the process. But it was not completely lost because a lot of it had been collected and collated, as it were, in books which spread all over the world. And so the actual data was not lost, just the originals, which is a tragedy in itself. But a lot of countries like Ireland and most of Britain and what have you, and a lot of the United States, where it didn't really start until about 300 or 400 years ago, those old records still exist, and they still, yield, new insights, simply because there it is. One of the most important things that was discovered in this searching of through historical data was a lot of data can be misinterpreted by the original, people experiencing it, like diseases and what have you. But the one thing you can't hide is dead bodies. And so when there was historical research into violence, murder, as it were, domestic violence, not domestic in the household, but just, street, civil violence, as it were, they found out that that the further back you go, the more violent the society was. We tend to lose fact of the progress that we make in terms of reducing crime rates and murder, but also increasing, affluence. I think somebody wrote a book which actually got some traction in the review industry, as it were, pointing out that poverty has been enormously reduced in the last 50, 60 years. What I call the great nuclear peace. Once everybody, the major players got nuclear weapons, major war, those enormous destructive wars where massive armies go, tromping back and forth across everybody's real estate, destroying property, killing people, and ruining and basically impoverishing huge quantities of the population. That was no longer going on. And at the same time, the Green Revolution, an offshoot, so to speak, of the Industrial Revolution, followed by the genetically modified foods, which encountered some religious resistance in many parts of the world. Religious in terms of anti-science attitudes. They're all going to turn to Frankenfoods. That has never happened. It probably never will happen, but that's another story. But the idea of developing crops that grow in more hostile environments, grow in larger quantities, grow as more nutritious foods. One of the early GMO modifications was to simply add more of the certain vitamins to rice and eliminate whole classes of afflictions in countries where you could have an adequate diet in terms of calories, but you still have a lot of dietary deficiencies, which would give especially children problems growing up. Well, the GMO, the modified rice and in some cases wheat changed all that. And suddenly, as if by magic, you had generations growing up, bigger, stronger, smarter, more educated because there was less poverty, more children could be educated. And this happened so slowly, it's like the old boiling a frog. You just increase the temperature bit by bit and suddenly the frog is boiled. But it works in a positive sense. All these things happen and suddenly we're in a much better world. But we don't realize it because basically it happens so slowly that, we just, each year said, well, so things are a little different. But if you look back 10, 20, 30 years, it's a lot different. That's why old codgers like me, and you're a junior old codger, so you remember some of this. For example, automobile accidents. I think when you were young, you remember seeing the windshields with the not the smashed glass, but where the head hit the glass when the car stopped.
Right.
You don't see that anymore. That was a huge source of fatalities and of people with permanent brain damage. And a lot of the rehab centers were full of people who basically used to be vibrant, and healthy and what have you. But one bonk on a windshield in a fender bender, going with 25 miles an hour. That's all it took. Concussion, bingo, out of action. Tragic. And seatbelts, airbags. Airbags were a classic example of something that made unsafe driving so safe that more people drove in an unsafe fashion. Not to the extent that it reversed all the good things that the airbags were doing, but it was noticed again by the epidemiologists, the analysts of vital statistics, that we have far fewer vehicle deaths, but my God, we got a lot more accidents. And what was happening there when they basically went to the police reports, or just talking to cops who covered that, and doctors who covered the people who crawled out of those accidents, which would have killed their parents or especially their grandparents, was that these people felt fearless. Said, so what if I go off a cliff? The airbags will deploy and maybe I'll break something, but no big deal. So you get this slow progress, especially for the better, which isn't noticed. You think, well, it's always been this way, and of course it hasn't. But it can be easily reversed if you basically, blow up the system that is producing it. For a long time, a lot of people in the West, they thought communism was the superior form of government. Everybody got medical care, everybody got this, everybody got that. The Soviet Union collapsed, and they found that Soviet Union was, in truth, talk about the Wizard of Oz. Once they got a look behind the curtain, so to speak, they realized the place was a health and ecological disaster area. The pollution was enormous. It was a state secret to reveal any thing being polluted. There were areas that were still radioactive because of work done developing bombs and what have you. To this day, there are signs of certain highways, close windows, move at top speed, for the next 100 and some odd kilometers. And if you were one of those rare people who carry a Geiger counter with you, you'd have to turn on your Geiger counter and you'd see why you should close your windows and move at top speed, until you get to the outside the Chernobyl zone. Chernobyl is one of those zones where we know about, but there are many more in Russia which will never, be clean again. There will always be close your windows, drive fast. The water pollution is still a work in progress. China got bit by this. They for years said, oh no, we are solving all the problems of, pollution and what have you. Actually, the Chinese didn't have as many problems with pollution because they were mostly a farming culture. And they had, over the centuries, developed fairly, how should I put it, long-term agricultural practices, which did not cause the epidemics of widespread pollution that the industrial age agriculture sometimes created. Now, there are ways around all of this, and once it gets noticed, the industrialized nations, to their credit, have jumped on it and have fixed it. For example, I remember when I was young, we had a lot of unused piers because everything had gone container, and that had changed the whole landscape of how you brought in cargo. There was no longer break bulk. In other words, this is ancient history for most people, where you basically had to send in 100 people, stevedores, and they would haul out the stuff by nets and what have you, and sort it and put it on trucks. With containers, that was all changed. You'd load up a container at the source, a factory, whatever, lock it up, seal it, with a manifest, and it would generally get delivered to one stop, a distribution center, where whatever they were carrying would be then go on to, delivery to stores and what have you. Amazon has made a fortune off of this because they have taken this to another level. And people complain about Amazon all they want, but it's certainly a much more efficient and cheaper form of shopping than anything in the past. And so far, Bezos, the guy who thought it up, he realizes that if he abuses it, there will be competition that will make him, a historical footnote. So, while all successful companies and governments, as it were, try to make themselves permanent. Keep it the way things are. As long as there is competition, you're going to have something called creative destruction, where somebody more efficient will come in. Now we're seeing this sped up, as it were, by the current coronavirus panic. By the way, that's something else that should be referred to as historical writing. It's tragic, really, the way this has been politicized. And I'm talking about facts you can look up yourself. For example, Diamond Princess. Google that. Now, that was a cruise ship which finally was allowed to. They were called plague ships that few months ago. And everybody on board, there was about 1,000 people, or close to 1,000, were tested for COVID-19. At that point, they had a test where they could detect who had it, and most importantly, who had encountered it and basically shrugged it off. And that happens, as we know from personal experience, every year with the influenza. Every year for probably for centuries, but it was only really noticed about a little over a century ago, especially after the Spanish flu, that this disease comes around annually. There's no cure for it, but at the same time, it isn't a bubonic plague. It isn't an enormous killer. It does kill a lot of people. The Spanish flu was particularly horrendous because it attacked the healthy, the young people who were healthier. What it did was it played with the immune system, and the healthier, the more your body was going to basically attack itself more strenuously. So unlike most flu variants, strains, and some years there's more than one, they basically hurt the people who are the elderly, who are already infirm, and anybody who's got an underlying condition, as they point out, who have a weaker immune system. But occasionally you have one that goes right for that, basically triggers the immune system in a certain way. To a certain degree, coronavirus does this. But the bottom line is, we quickly found out that the coronavirus is mainly a threat to people who are already sick. And a lot of people didn't want to believe that. A lot of people still don't believe that, especially politicians. They want to shut, for a long time until there's no coronavirus, but that's going to ruin the economy, which is going to kill a lot more people. And of course, in New York State, where we have a bunch of real charmers running the operation, in New York City, they made two major mistakes. Now, granted, a city is a place where you're going to get more infections because there are more people living closer together. But two things that were known at the beginning, again, Diamond Princess and various other examples of if it kills at all, it kills people with underlying conditions. Oh, by the way, the three important lessons learned from the Diamond Princess said, and again, you can Google it and see for yourself. 80% of the people exposed to it, nothing. It's like the flu. In fact, some people, like my family, for reasons I won't go into, genetic, we don't get the flu. I double-checked with my siblings. I know my mother didn't. She was also resistant to bacterial infections. Again, it was an inherited trait. Unfortunately, those traits didn't include good teeth and a lot of hair, but you can't have them all. But the thing was that most influenza people, either they get it, and if they check for antibodies, which they rarely do. In other words, one of the problems with the coronavirus is a lot more people are being tested. With influenza, the only ones who get counted are the ones who die, basically. I mean, a lot of people get seriously sick. I mean, anybody who works in an office or a crowded environment, flu season comes along and says, so-and-so is down with the flu and he's out for a couple of days, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then some people say, well, if you feel like you might have the flu, stay home for a few days until it gets over. Don't give it to everybody else. But as we've discovered over the decades, this stuff spreads in the fall. The flu season goes from late summer to early spring, and then it just goes, it disappears, and another strain, gets brewed, usually in China, and springs forth, in the fall. the coronavirus isn't that much more deadly than the worst regular influenzas we've had recently. In fact, I think the ones in the late 60s, 68, 69, I think, or 67, 68, and 57, 58 were more deadly than the coronavirus. Why that isn't news, I don't know. I think it's because if you want to attract eyeballs, you got to basically go for the the gruesome. So you don't want to talk about this being a basically a more lethal flu, but not that lethal. That doesn't grab headlines. Everybody, all the rest of the media will jump on you for being a Pollyanna, yada yada. So the truth can get you in trouble. That's another reason for revising history. You want history that is basically more attractive. And so the history of America has been rewritten many times since the Civil War, for example. For example, one of the great tragedies in American history was the deal made. I forget the election. It was in the 1870s. There was sort of a hung election, and of course the the southern states were now again part of the Union, and they were all Democrats, and they were all in Congress and the Senate, and so they basically brokered a deal. We will let your guy become president if you end the Reconstruction. And added to that, they traded more favors. Whatever happens in the South, ignore it. We're just, getting back our power, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole Ku Klux Klan, the whole Jim Crow, that was all the Democratic Party getting payback for, what they thought they had lost because they lost the war. It's still going on. I mean, one of the things that JFK, well, not so much JFK, but his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, who was a powerhouse in the Congress, he was a Texas Democrat who was a bit of even by then standards of the time, very liberal, very into doing right by African Americans, Spanish, Hispanic Americans, what have you. Without him, they wouldn't have gotten the the civil rights bills and the voting rights bills through Congress, because while the Republicans were solidly for it, they didn't have the votes. And basically, Johnson had to make a lot of deals, and in many cases, he just simply bullied, people he knew that he could get away with bullying, to vote for him this way. Yet trades were made. A lot of money was wasted, as it were. There was a lot of pork dished out to basically buy votes. That's a form of corruption, which the history tends to overlook. But as Thomas Jefferson, I believe it was Jefferson, when the decision had been made in the various meetings, after we had won the Revolutionary War, to form a government. Some people wanted a monarchy with Washington as the first king, and Washington wasn't having any of that. And finally, they decided on a republic, which is not a democracy. They based it on the old Roman Republic, which lasted 500 years, more than most other democracies until quite recently. And then when people asked him, when they came out of the meeting where the decision was made, they said, Mr. Jefferson, or maybe it was...
It was Franklin.
Anyway,
it was Franklin, yeah.
Yeah. They asked him, what do we have? And he says, we have a republic, if you can keep it. And I think it was Jefferson who said, in order to keep a republic, a republic alive and vibrant, you need a revolution every 20 years. Now, he wasn't talking about tearing the whole thing down. He was talking about the corruption. Because one thing even the Greeks and the Romans were befuddled by was the slow growth of corruption, where for a long time the Romans had a system where there were problems, and for example, the poorer people, they had complaints about debt bondage and being enslaved, and et cetera, but bit by bit, since they basically, they formed the army. The army was composed of there weren't enough rich people to go out and fight all the wars the Romans were gotten involved in, and so the Senate, which was dominated by the patricians, they basically had to make concessions, and before it was over, they had to share the wealth. Romans no longer paid taxes. They could not be enslaved. They could not be executed. They could be exiled, which is worse as far as some Romans were concerned. You would be sent to some non-Roman part of the world. And there were an enormous number of benefits. That's where you got the old stories about the bread and circuses. There was a free food distribution. Uh, it was a situation similar to what the Arab Gulf oil states have done. They didn't want to end their domination, the royal families, or well, actually, there are royal families in each of there are no democracies in the Persian Gulf. They're all monarchies of one form or another. But they all realized, some sooner than others, that we got to share the wealth. You got to basically buy the people off. That didn't stop the calls for democratization. Some states, more than others, demanded, more participation of all people. And we see this pattern. You see a pattern here, right? As once more people get wealthy, you have to face the fact that more of them will want to participate in the decisions. What brought the Roman Republic down, and this basically, nobody tried to rewrite this, because after it all collapsed, there was a lot of effort for centuries put into why did it collapse. Well, it collapsed partly for economic reasons. The wars with the Carthaginians had been so devastating, especially when a couple of years where Hannibal was basically rampaging back and forth across Italy. The deaths among the what they call the yeoman class, in other words, the independent farmers, was so heavy that a lot of them, the families, they no longer had enough adults to run the farm efficiently. They were very efficient farmers. For a long time, you could not join the Roman army unless you could afford to buy the weapons, and they were expensive. That meant armor, a helmet, pylon. You spent most of your a large portion, say a month, a year or more, training with these weapons. It was like a citizen militia, but it was organized. The Romans were very organized, and that kept the Republic going for 500 years, which is, that when we can look back now and say, geez, that's rare. There have been some republics, some Italian and the Swiss Republic and what have you, that have now surpassed that. But again, they only do it by constantly adapting and including everybody. China is now going through a very painful process of learning what republicanization, what democratization means. They have created that deal to switch from communism to fascism, meant, and Deng Xiaoping, the guy who basically pushed that through after the Mao crew was all done and gone, said it is glorious to be rich. In the implication being, especially if the Communist Party, the state, got a share. And suddenly you had a middle class in China. They'd never had that before. You had something like, nearly half the population is what, by Chinese standards, is a middle class, meaning they can afford to buy their own apartment or home, as the case may be. They can afford to often buy a small car, an automobile. If not, they got several bicycles in the family. They live well. They eat more meat than ever before in Chinese history. They live well. They go on vacations. East Asia, even, the United States, before the current unpleasantness, was awash in Chinese tourists. The ugly American was replaced by the ugly Chinese, because these were people who had never gone on a foreign vacation before. They didn't know how to act. The Chinese still have this attitude that we are the finest people in the world and everybody else is, lesser beings, et cetera, et cetera. Let's not go into that, but that is a real problem in Asia. Ask any Asian who's not Chinese. But inside of China, the Chinese government suddenly had this democracy movement. Not just the Tiananmen Square, where basically had the kids who are always the pioneers, and the other ones who get cut down. In this case, in Tiananmen Square, about 20,000 of them. But once they get older and they have families and they have positions in the economy and often in the government, you can no longer just eradicate them, because if you do, you eradicate the nation's wealth. So they have power, which has to be addressed. This was the problem in Hong Kong. China felt that Hong Kong was always the wealthiest part of China, even when it wasn't part of China, especially when it wasn't part of China, when it was still living under the 99-year British lease, as it were, which ended in, 97, 96. The Chinese realized that they had a goose laying golden eggs, and the only way they could keep it was to basically satisfy the Republicans, shall we say, the people who wanted a participatory government in Hong Kong. And so they guaranteed them they could keep their foreign ways, which means, participative government, straight, honest courts, et cetera, freedom of speech until 2047. Well, that has just been erased. The Chinese government, could not put up with all this, free speech in their midst. It was simply too much to take. And indeed, what China has done with Mr. Ping, the current, chairman, as it were, emperor, as they call him behind his back, what he did a few years ago was he basically dumped the post-Mao system, where every 5 years the collective leadership of the senior leadership, the Politburo, whatever you want to call it, of the senior Communist Party leaders would select a headman, as it were. It sounds like the old Roman Republic, where you elect two councils who would run the country for, well, in the Romans' case, they're only for a year. But anyway, 5 years, and then you had to basically retire. And at least you retire still breathing and still with some wealth, and a new guy would come on. Well, Xing said, "Well, this is not efficient." I always get scared when people say, "Well, I have a more efficient way of doing things." That means your life is in danger as well as everything else you might possess. He basically said, "No, from now on, you get a good man in that position, and he stays there as long as he remains as long as he can basically hang on to power." He didn't put it that way, but that's what it came down to. Well, now Mr. Xi is in danger of losing his power because he's lost control of the country. As we all know, the news of coronavirus first came out of China. There was panic in Hubei, in Wuhan, a major city there, where it first came out. They had tried to suppress it, shades of Chernobyl, but it spread, and apparently it's still popping up. We still aren't getting straight answers out of China because, again, they're trying to rewrite the past, the recent past, and it's proven difficult. China spends billions of dollars a year trying to control the internet. They have created their own internet. You can get access to the World Wide Web, but the Chinese intranet, as it were, is tightly supervised. It isn't completely free because basically you've created a generation of internet users. In fact, I think the largest single ethnic group on the internet are Han Chinese. But you've created a group of internet users who have become very expert in evading censorship. So be careful what you ask for. China asked for a more powerful censorship system, and all they got were several generations of Chinese who are very clever. They're constantly changing code words, memes, as it were, and the system can't keep up with it. And they find other ways of getting around, the Great Wall of China. So bad news eventually gets out. Now, it doesn't get publicized as widely as in, say, the United States or in the West in general, because the mass media is still tightly controlled by the state. But the truth is not. And in the past, and before the internet, you could basically control all the news. And North Korea was an excellent example of this, because when more and more North Koreans were getting out of North Korea, this only happened in the last 20 years, you now got like 40,000, which is an enormous number of North Koreans now citizens of South Korea. One thing the South Koreans discovered was that people getting out, they were getting out for many reasons, mainly just to survive. It had become such a deadly environment in North Korea that a lot of North Koreans realized it was worth risking your life, literally, to get across the border, to live illegally in China, and then to eventually pay a smuggler, as it were, to get you down to Thailand or Burma, where you could reach a South Korean embassy. And the embassy had a deal where they could get you out to South Korea, where you got all sorts of bennies. You got South Korean citizenship. But worst of all, so to speak, according to a lot of these North Korean migrants, was the culture shock. They didn't realize how much better life was in South Korea. And this came as a real shock to the system. I mean, sometimes physically. Now, for the last 10 years, you've had enormous smuggling of electronic media, thumb drives, or especially the what do you call them, the camera, memory things. You can get 100 gigabytes on one little size of a fingernail. These were smuggled out, increasing or smuggled in, as it were, because they were a hot commodity. You could sell that content, again, at the risk of going to prison camp or being executed, and make a lot of money. But all they contained were South Korean soap operas, movies, all sorts of, anything that appeared that was popular on South Korean television. News, especially newscasts. That was a real eye opener in North Korea. Said, this is really happening, and this is what's really killing the North Korean government. They're trying to, cope with this, and it's proving very difficult. So again, what I guess it comes down to is, yes, you can rewrite the past, but eventually you're going to be found out, and it's going to reflect on you a lot worse. Now, the only thing the revisionists have going for them, the rewriters, I shouldn't say revisionists, because a revision is usually somebody trying to get a clearer example. I mean, I think you're going to see a lot more revisionist, as it were, histories of the post-Civil War South and the Democratic Party, because that's a aspect of history that has been concealed by mutual agreement for generations. But now it's coming out because it points out the absurdity of what Black Lives Matter is trying to achieve, not to attack the things that are killing most blacks, but just something that'll get somebody some temporary political power, if that. And we'll soon find out how effective that is. So again, you got to be careful what you ask for. You might get it. And
right.
In this case, people are saying, well, we want to know what happened in the past. And my advice is, are you sure? Do you have any idea? You might be in for an unpleasant surprise.
Especially, I think a good example of that is what's happened at Princeton with Woodrow Wilson all of a sudden popping up as
he's one of the worst things that ever happened to the African Americans, to the post-slavery, African Americans, because not only did he segregate the civil service, which was not segregated as part of the Reconstruction. I mean, the Lincoln, who was not really, he was willing to make a deal with slavery. I mean, you got to realize that in some countries, like, again, it's often useful to find out how other countries handled a similar problem. Brazil, which was the home of the largest number of Africans in bondage, still in bondage, they did not free the slaves until 1885. And even then, there was a lot of yelling and screaming and threats of violence. But they avoided the violence, but they didn't really liberate. In fact, one of the only places where there was a true, liberation was in the British colonies. That were still colonies, in the 1820s or 18 something, I think,
yeah, somewhere in that, yeah.
They outlawed
by the 1830s. By the 1830s, you can see that in Jamaica. I forget the exact year.
Right. All right, but what they did was something that was proposed in the United States, but again, it was considered too expensive. Was they bought out the slave owners. Now, they did two things. One, yes, they basically had bonds. The Indians did a similar thing when they bought out the royal families, the aristocracy, the landholding aristocracy, and eliminated serfdom, which still existed in India for all practical matters. They issued bonds. They incurred a lot of debt, but they brought these people out. They gave the people the land. Agriculture became a lot more productive, and that basically, was a life-saving thing in India. They didn't do that in Pakistan. And as a result, Pakistan, with a much smaller population, has had a much more difficult time economically because they didn't end the large scale land ownership, the serfdom, as it were, as the Indians did. But in Jamaica, in the English colonies, especially the Caribbean colonies, not only did they buy off the slave owners, and many of them were happy to take the money and go back to England, get away from the fevers and all the bad weather, but They established schools, which they already had for a lot of freedmen and what have you, and that's why when a lot of the islanders, as the Caribbean blacks, began immigrating to the United States or even to England, they were much better educated. And of course, they spoke with a British accent, which certainly didn't hurt your employment opportunities. And that, of course, caused resentment among, American blacks because they hadn't had the 40 acres and a mule. I mean, that's where Reconstruction was headed. Bit by bit, the Reconstruction effort realized that we need more money, we need more economic freedom, as it were, and that's what the South, basically the majority, the white majority, didn't want. And the Democratic Party said, "Well, we'll get it for you. We'll get all your property back, et cetera, et cetera." And they did it in spades, so to speak. And they also rewrote for a lot of Americans the history of the Civil War.
Right.
It was fashionable to say that the War of Northern Aggression, et cetera, but basically it was fought for economic purposes. The agrarian, the plantation-dominated South. See, something a lot of people don't realize was that the Appalachian, the mountain states, as it were, the mountain territories, and the Appalachians they start literally. That's where I grew up. I could walk to where the Appalachian Trail was. It extends from Vermont all the way down to the Mississippi, and those people wanted nothing to do with secession. And while West Virginia, we know, became separated from Virginia, became a separate state. But that was just an extreme example. Throughout the South, where they had the Appalachians, those areas were either under military occupation by the Confederate military, or they were simply no-go zones. The mountain people stayed to themselves, which is the way they normally prefer it, and you simply didn't go in there, after escaped slaves or whatever. And that's something that didn't really get written up. That did not become a part of the official history, as it were. Now, that's all being revised, and I don't think it's going to be revised to a lot of people's, satisfaction, as it were.
Yep. The same with how the black vote was suppressed after Reconstruction and after enormous efforts on Grant's part while he was president to try to make sure that the blacks had the voting rights and like that. That's another thing that's been rewritten is the Chernow, the biographer of Hamilton, has also written a biography of Grant that has basically brought him back into good standing, I would say, and shown that he continued the fight for the rights of African Americans after the Civil War. And
I wonder if that's why they're trying to tear down his statues too.
Yeah, that's weird. The same thing with the 54th Massachusetts statue.
Right. And Lincoln, and
right.
Frederick Douglass. What is going on here?
Well,
they trying to get behind.
Yeah, that's the Antifa or however you want to say it. Part of all of this.
They brag about being Marxist, but what the hell does that mean anymore?
Right.
Well, Jim, listen, there's something wrong with the microphone.
You're doing fine, Austin.
All right. The thing is, I've listened to this. It's great stuff. I've had a couple of comments on this, but let me make a comment on tearing down Grant statues or several prominent Union generals like O.O. Howard. O.O. Howard. What university did he establish? Do you all remember? Howard University, which is one of the most important black educational institutions established in the 19th century. And there are a slew, and most of them, of course, were Union Army. But senior Union Army officers, maybe not all of them were senior officers, that continued to fight for the civil rights of freed slaves. I wonder when that's going to be thoroughly and openly revisited. And one other comment on Jim talking about the pro-unionists living in the Appalachians. Most of it, I'll even be a little bit more specific. It would be down the kind of the central or eastern rim of the Appalachians, running from West Virginia down to northern Alabama. You could see this crop up in the Union order of battles, like, let's see, I think it's 2nd Alabama Cavalry, U.S. I believe that was one of they were part of Sherman's bodyguard in the Army of the West for a while. Some of these guys were either they were quote unquote hillbillies, to use that as a joke, but some of them were miners. And some of them were working in those, the iron mills in northern Alabama. They had nothing to do with. They had nothing to do with secession. They didn't have anything to do with it. You see it with a number of Tennessee units, and particularly Knoxville, eastern Tennessee, didn't want to secede. And but a number of Tennessee units that were in the Army of the West, and as both you guys noted, for a long time, these were rarely mentioned. I will point out, yes, there were some Northerners, particularly from Southern Illinois, Cairo area, and the like, who served in Confederate infantry units in Tennessee. But the number of quote unquote non-secessionist Southerners far outnumbered those that from the North that took the side of the South.
Yeah,
I'm boggled by this, Jim. I know you're asking why tear down Grant's statue, but there's all this. It's really a rich and fascinating history if people would pay attention to it. And the other thing is, it depolarizes when you see what Frederick Douglass, a totally admirable man, thought Lincoln was the answer, and he was. And they were going after a Frederick Douglass statue in Washington. I saw that on YouTube. I'll be quiet now, guys.
Yeah, I think that goes to the point that what we've all known for a long time is the failure of our school systems to actually teach history anymore, and to teach it in a proper way. The groups that are involved in the rioting, the maliciousness, are uneducated, pasty white folk. That if you take a look at,
can you be quoted on that? We're really going to get a lot out of it. That's a good quote.
Because a lot of if you look at who is actually tearing down the statues and like that, you have some African Americans mixed in there, but a lot of it is college-aged white kids that are, I don't know, it's the moment. They want to be part of something, and they have no idea what they're really part of or what they're trying to do, and they're misaimed and they're misguided, and there's a lot of stuff that and I we've gone over time, but I'd like to finish up with this, is that personally, I have no problem if they want to not pull down the statues of Civil War Southern generals and put them someplace else other than in the public square. And I personally have no problem. It's always bugged me that we've had some of our most famous military institutions in the South named after Southern generals, Bragg, Benning, Hood, etc. And because those generals were traitors to the United States, but I want it done in a proper way, not in a let's burn down the system way.
Dan, let me make a comment about that. This is not something new for me. As a matter of fact, there was a discussion going on here in Austin about quite some, and involved a local church that had a stained glass window that included back in a corner Robert E. Lee. And I was asked my opinion about it, and I said, I consider Lee to be a traitor. There are a lot of Union Army officers, fellow West Pointers that thought the same thing, and they would use George Thomas, remember, a Virginian and a West Pointer, as a counterexample. He didn't resign his commission, and he was ended up being one of the senior commanders in the Union Army, despite being suspected because he was from Virginia. He didn't resign it because he'd sworn an oath to defend the U.S. Constitution. But there were some clear and conscious decisions made in April of 1865, and some of it goes back. I know Jim knows this, but discussions between Sherman, who anybody who said would be go easy on the South. I mean, he was the wraith of the South, and talking to the Confederate General Joe Johnston. And also some communications between the Army of the Potomac and Lee about how do we end this without starting an insurgency that was just going to go on forever, meaning with disgruntled Southern soldiers. So sell out, it was you Confederate officers get to keep your sabers and your sidearms. And those of you Southern soldiers who brought your own horses and mules, take them home. And we'll give you some food. And is that a payoff, or was that an intelligent decision, given the number of deaths that had already been incurred in the war? You go back and you look at it in the moment, and the discourse between Johnston and Sherman was extremely intelligent. And Sherman, when he comes back to Washington, is excoriated for being easy on the South. Well, that's what media did in 1865 to one of the two top generals in the Union Army, and certainly the one that broke the South's will to fight, William Tecumseh Sherman. Once again, why am I going off on this fascinating history? Gee, there was a reason. Now, the fact that the South, as Jim described, gets to come back and romanticize its rebellion, there's something to be said about why did media and academia of the time permit it? I'll leave it at that.
A story to be written.
Yeah. Well, we've gone over time, and glad that you could join us at the end, Austin, and we will talk to you gentlemen next time.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, Dan, before we hang up.
Yes.
It seems there's something wrong with the mic on the Plantronics. I have no idea what it is. It will not turn on. It will not turn off. Now, can I get a new one? Can you send? I love this thing. I haven't dropped it. I have been suffering. It worked. Last time we used it, I haven't been sitting in its plates in the closet. Could you send me another one, or do I have to?
Sure.
Right.
No, I can have Amazon send you a new one.
All right. Let me give you the address. I want you to send it. I'll email it. All right.
Okay, email it. Yep, that'll be good.
Thanks,
all right.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.